Hello everyone, myself Monica, Head and Assistant Professor, Department of Nutrition and Dietetics, St. Josephs College of Arts and Science for Women, Hosur. Today we are going to see about breads. There are many ingredients that is being used in the preparation of bread. They are flour, yeast, water, milk, fat, sweetener such as sugar, salt, and egg. Steps in bread making process. The first step involves flying fermentation. Fermentation is brought about by the action of yeast. When yeast grows, it consumes certain material and gives off certain byproducts. Take a small quantity of water, add a little sugar and yeast and mix it well. Let it rest for 5 to 7 minutes. Then add a small quantity of flour and make it a thick paste. This mixture is known as flying ferment. The best temperature for yeast activity is 78 to 80 degree Fahrenheit. Next step is mixing. Mixing is one of the most important steps. A dough is mixed to contribute and distribute all ingredients as equally as possible. The best way to do mixing is to dissolve the dry ingredients in water and make the flour wet with little water. Mixing the dough also helps develop the gluten. The mixing has to be done till maximum gluten is developed and water absorption is obtained. When mixing the dough, it will be noticed that the machine does not labor at first. This stage is known as pickup stage. At this point, the mix will appear as though too much water has been used. But with continuous mixing, the gluten is developed and the dough seems to be drying up. This is known as drying up stage. The dough will still be sticking to the bowl with more mixing. The dough will pull away from the mixing bowl. This stage is known as cleanup stage. And the next step is bulk fermentation. After the mixing, the dough is fermented for a predetermined time. During this time, the yeast feeds on the sugar and produces CO2 and alcohol. Apart from these, some quantities of glycerin, lactic acid, acetic acid, succinic acid are produced. And the next step is knockback. Knockback is the process to be carried out correctly by extending the slides of the dough and putting it in the center, after which the whole mass of the dough comes in contact with fresh air and the dough is virtually turned upside down. And the next stage is dividing and rounding. During the dividing and rounding process, the fermented dough is divided into the desired size. Normally, 12% additional dough is taken than the desired weight of the finished product. Then only we get the accurate weight of the bread after the baking and cooling is done. Cutting the fermented dough may disturb the trend of the gluten strands, which may affect the final texture. And the next step is intermediate proofing. During the dividing and rounding operation, the dough pieces lose a little of their gas and majority of their palatability, and the gluten strands collapse and becomes difficult to mold. So before molding, one should give rest for 10 to 15 minutes. And the next step is molding and panning. After intermediate proofing, the pieces are molded according to the desired shape of the finished product. During molding, even pressure should be given, otherwise, the finished product may have faults like uneven texture, thick grain, holes, streaks, core, etc. After molding, the pieces are immediately placed into clean and well greased molds of appropriate size. And the next step is final proofing. After panning, the bread is allowed to proof under suitable condition. The temperature should be 90 to 98 degree Fahrenheit. Humidity should be 80 to 83%. During this time, again it gets gas that is lost during molding, and the gluten is matured that it expands with the gas and still retains sufficient strength to hold the gas. And the next step is baking. The product is baked after it has acquired full volume. For good results, the temperature and humidity should be well maintained. The ideal temperature of baking bread should be 200 to 220 degree Fahrenheit for 20 to 30 minutes. When an open top loaf is baked, it should get a break on the sides of the loaf, and the characteristics of this break should be smooth. This crack is called an oven break. And the next step is depanning. After baking, the product should be removed from the mold immediately. Otherwise, moisture trapped in between the mold and the product will make the product soggy. It spoils the product quality. And the next process is cooling. After depanning, the bread should be allowed to cool. After cooling, the starch granules will shrink and stabilize in gluten frame. And the next process is slicing. If the bread is sliced before cooling, the unstable positioned starch granules will lump together, giving a poor appearance to the slice. And the last step is packing. Bread is packed in order to preserve the freshness and to protect it from the hazards. For attracting the consumers and to catch the eyes of the people, the packing material is always printed. Processing methods of bread. There are various processing methods. They are straight dough method, modified straight dough method, no dough time method, delayed salt method, sponge and dough method, ferment and dough method. Straight dough method. Put together and the dough is fermented for a huge time. The fermentation time of the straight dough depends on the strength of the flour. Strong flour requires more fermentation time to mature adequately. Flours which require 2 to 3 hours for maturing should be used for making bread by straight method. Flours that take very long period for maturing should not be used because during prolonged fermentation period it is very difficult to control the temperature of the dough, and rise in temperature will cause acid taste and flavor in bread. Modify straight dough method. For sweet doughs, the straight dough method is modified to ensure even distribution of fat and sugar. Soften the yeast in part of the liquid using a separate container. Combine the fat, sugar, salt, milk solids and flavorings and mix until well combined. And the eggs gradually as fast as they are absorbed. Add the liquids and milk, mix briefly. Add the flour and yeast. Next method is no dough time method. Dough is fermented in a usual manner. It is allowed a brief period for it to recover from the strains of mixing. Since dough is not fermented, the two functions of fermentation are achieved to some extent by increasing the quantity of yeast and by mixing the dough little slacker and warmer. Although it is possible to make fairly acceptable bread by using this method, the product has poor keeping quality. Due to the absence of fermentation, the gluten and the starch are not conditioned sufficiently to retain the moisture. Next method is salt delayed method. This is a slight variation of straight method where all the ingredients are mixed except salt and fat. As salt has a controlling effect on enzymatic action of yeast, the salt is added at an opaque stage. The method of adding salt at a later stage may be according to the convenience of individual baker. Whatever way is chosen, mixing should be given initially and 1/4 mixing at the time of adding salt. Due to absence of salt, the fermentation speed is enhanced and gluten least shorter time. Flour takes too long for conditioning and should not be used for making bread by straight dough method. For such flour, sponge and dough method is more suitable where the problem is controlling flour, proportionate amount of water, yeast and sugar are mixed together. Longer fermenting sponges may also contain some amount of as well as mix all ingredients evenly. The sponge is fermented for a predetermined time. The ferment is carried out longest for almost 16 to 17 hours and maximum for an hour. Ferment and dough method. This is a variation of sponge and dough method. Very often a bread formula may contain milk, eggs, substantial quantity of fat and sugar. All these formula ingredients will have a retarding effect on yeast activity. If all the formula yeast, part of flour, yeast, food and sufficient water are mixed together, the yeast gets initially an environment which is conducing to vigorous activity, and at the end of fermentation time, it is in a fit condition to take an extra load of fermentation and presence of milk, egg, excessive fat, etc. Fermentation time of the ferment depends on the formulation of the desired product, but very often it becomes a matter of individual preference. A ferment containing milk should be guarded against over fermentation as it will develop more than desired quantity of lactic acid, which in turn will affect the flavor, taste and texture of the product. When breads are baked, there are various reasons and the possibilities for a fault to happen. There are two kinds of faults. One is external fault and internal fault. External fault means the fault which can be seen through the naked eyes. External faults include lack of volume, too much volume, crust color too pale, crust color too dark, cracking of crust too thick, crust too hard, crust blisters, leathery crust, irregularity of shape, shelling of top crust, lackness of cleanliness. Internal faults. Internal faults are nothing but the fault or the mistake which can be seen when it is cut. They are holes and tunnels, poor texture and flavor, coarse grain, grey crumb, streaky crumb, poor keeping quality, and poor texture. Thank you.